Kant's philosophy. So Kant was born in 1724. He was kind of fourth of 9 children, which is probably not that unusual back then. His family was fairly kind of modest. His dad was a harness maker. Harness, I guess, probably for horses, but I'm not totally sure. And you know, there was a devout pietist household, a kind of branch of Lutheranism, and there was intense religious devotion, personal humility, and a literal interpretation of the Bible. And obviously, Kant didn't follow in that tradition. He believed in God to some extent, but he wasn't a sort of a regular Christian. He led a pretty regular kind of, but pretty sheltered life, and he never moved more than 10 miles from his home city. I mean, these days that's sort of unimaginable, but even back then it would be very unusual, I think. So he went to a sort of religious school from the ages of 8 to 16, and he learned Latin. He didn't like all the religion. Then he went to university at the age of 16. He started off with theology, but then moved to math and physics. And he learned about the work of Isaac Newton. And you know how so many of the philosophers around the 18th century were really very interested in the work of Isaac Newton. His dad died in 1746. He had to kind of go to work. He became a private tutor for wealthy families in the countryside. He still published something, even though he was kind of not at a university. And it was a work in astronomy. He published a theory about the nature of the solar system. So then he got to university, he did his degree, and he became a lecturer. And interestingly, he was paid directly by the students. I kind of like that. You know, then I wouldn't be, my money wouldn't be going to the university. I'd be getting it all directly. Apparently he was a popular lecturer. He was lecturing up to 20 hours a week, which seems a lot to me. Apparently he was a very sort of charismatic speaker. He was interestingly kind of known for his elegant dress, and he went to dinner parties. He was good at a conversation, but he never, as far as we know, had any sort of romantic relationship. So it's interesting. All right, so he wrote in 1783 that it was David Hume who made him really think about philosophy and interrupted his dogmatic slumber. He was thinking about the puzzles that were raised by Hume for a long time. Then he wrote his sort of major work, The Critique of Pure Reason, 1781. And that was kind of adapting ideas of Hume, but making them compatible with some kind of rationalism of the form of people like Descartes. We're going to see that his view is, to a large extent, that the mind is very active in constructing our experience, rather than just being passively receiving experience from inputs to the senses. So a kind of Kantian view is that we construct the world rather than we just see the world. And he said that we have kind of categories like cause and effect, and our experience is constructed in space and time. And all of that is stuff that we construct. It's not part of the ultimate reality. So he thought that this was a sort of a total change in the way we understand our relationship to reality, and he kind of felt like it was a total revolution. He also wrote about ethics. He's famous for his work on duty and rules. His view of morality is, to a large extent, that there are rules to follow. In some ways, it seems to be a fairly rigid view. He thinks the rules have to be universal. They don't allow for exceptions. And so that leads to his idea of the categorical imperative, that any moral rule has to be able to be a universal law. And he's famous for his humanity principle, that we should treat people like persons. We should never use people. We should always treat people with respect. We'll return to some of the ethics later on. He also wrote about aesthetics, kind of art, feeling of awe and terror we experience when we confront the vastness of nature. I'm not sure that's a feeling I do have when experiencing the vastness of nature, but apparently other people identify with that. He was sort of known for having a very regular routine. He would get up at 5 a.m., have tea, smoke a pipe. Seems a little early in the morning to smoke a pipe, but there you go. And he lectured, and he went for an afternoon walk. He went to the same time every day. I guess he felt like it was good to get some exercise. And he was highly influential. He paved the way for other major philosophers. His idea of human dignity, which is in the idea of the principle of humanity, kind of is linked to the idea that people have rights and they should be respected. And certainly the whole idea of rights became extremely important in all sorts of movements. He also wrote about the importance of peace, and he died in 1804 saying it's good. So I guess one thing that's interesting about Kant is that he wrote his major works later on in life. We remember when we talked about Hume, he was writing in his late 20s. Kant was writing in his 40s, 50s, and 60s. Now, his actual writing is notoriously difficult. He has long sentences. He doesn't give helpful examples most of the time. He invents all sorts of terminology which goes against ordinary uses of words. His ideas are very abstract, and often he makes claims which looks like they're just plain wrong. So you kind of wonder, can he really mean that? So there are real challenges in understanding him. But the basic idea that we construct the world is a pretty easy one to get hold of. And it helps to compare Hume and Kant. Their views are in some ways very similar, but in other ways, Kant really kind of dives off the deep end in reacting against Hume. One of the big differences, as we'll see, is that Kant says it makes sense to believe in God and the afterlife and freedom. Hume definitely doesn't think it makes sense to believe in God and the afterlife. Freedom, he has his compatibilist view, while Kant has an incompatibilist view, and we'll see the difference between those. one, I think, a profitable way to start is to think about their views about causality. So Hume is very clear that we don't have any evidence to think that causes somehow force the effects to happen. He says all there is like just a constant conjunction, a pattern in the world. While Kant thinks there's a necessary connection between causes and effects. So a lot of his work is trying to explain that kind of idea. And it comes from the idea that, it's our mind which is actively structuring our experience and leads to there being necessary connections between cause and effect in our experience. And he thinks that's necessary in order for us to even be able to make any sense of the world at all. If it was just patterns, we wouldn't be able to make any sense. He thinks we have to be able to see a necessary connection. And to a large extent, Kant thinks that these ideas which we impose on our experience are not something we learn from the world, rather we impose them on the world a priori before experience. So we're definitely not receiving this information from our experience, rather we're sort of putting it in our experience. So just to remind you about Newton's laws of motion, especially number one, a body remains at rest or in motion at a constant speed in a straight line, except insofar it's acted upon by a force. So you can watch a pool player hit the white cue ball. The cue ball will hit the pack, and then the pack will scatter. That kind of idea is determined by Newton's laws. And what Kant wants to say is there's total causality in that. That sort of interactions is necessary interactions. So that's a very surprising claim in the sense that Newton's laws are not something we just discover. To a large extent, there's something that we impose on our experience. So, I mean, he doesn't quite say that we impose everything from those on our experience, but the basic idea is something that we impose. We structure our experience. So there are these necessary connections that are there as part of what he calls the phenomenal world. And that's what allows us to predict future events. So while Hume was saying, we don't have any real knowledge about the future, Kant thinks we do have knowledge about the future because we impose these laws on our experience. So just to remind you of the contrast, Hume doesn't think that we see anything like causal powers in our experience. He just thinks like Newton's laws are useful to make predictions, but they don't tell us about the fundamental nature of matter. And Kant, in some ways, agrees with that, in some ways disagrees with that. We'll get to that subtlety in a second. So there's this idea that our minds are active in taking information and then that's raw data, and we then synthesize that data into a unified experience. You see like a red ball, not just as a kind of a bunch of different sort of experiences, you see one red ball. So Kant is quite big on the idea that there's a unity to our experience which couldn't be explained if it was just something we were passively taking in. So his terminology is he talks about intuitions. Intuitions are like the raw materials, like light rays come into your eye, and then at some point it kind of goes into your brain, and there's something very passive about that. Your eye just lets the light in. But then once it gets into the mind takes the raw experiences and kind of molds them together. It synthesizes both intuitions and concepts. The concepts are what kind of makes sense of this raw data, these intuitions. So the intuitions are not conceptual. They're just kind of basic, kind of what we might call sense data, while Kant thinks that there's two pure forms of intuition, space and time, and our minds impose that on the sensory data, which has the surprising consequence that space and time are not part of ultimate reality. Rather, space and time are something that our minds create. So then more of his obscure terminology, he talks about percepts. Percepts are the experience you get after it's been synthesized. So the percepts are conceptual, and they are what provide this framework for kind of making everything make sense. And then you have a meaningful experience. You don't have just this kind of random pattern of sensations. You have a meaningful experience of objects that you understand. So it's in some ways it's a pretty simple view, and it makes quite a lot of sense. We'll be talking about how it kind of fits in with the work of modern psychology. It turns out, at least to a large extent, maybe not all the a priori stuff, but to a large extent, his view anticipated results that psychology later confirmed. So people like Locke and Hume thought of perception as very passive. And Kant is the one who emphasizes this idea of the activity of the mind and the processing of information. So now we're quite used to the idea of people having selective attention. You're able to, you're in a crowded room or at a party, and you're able to focus on some things and ignore others. So your senses are taking in all the information, but somehow your brain is able to focus on some parts of the information coming in and ignore other parts. And certainly we're constantly taking in information and making sense of it. When you look around, you see people, you see faces, and you recognize them as faces and people. You don't look around and see a bunch of shapes and you think, well, what are they? Oh yeah, there's like eyes and a nose and a mouth, or it must be a person. Your experience is already of a person. And then you're looking at, you have tables and chairs, you look out, you see grass and trees and benches. And so your experience already comes with concepts in it because the mind has taken the raw data and synthesized it and put it into concepts like those. So this is the idea that we construct reality. And certainly it kind of leads to the view that our beliefs and expectations influence how we perceive the world. So it may be that different people with different expectations have different experiences. Their beliefs about how the world is will change their experience. So just because you see something, just because two people see the same thing doesn't mean they're going to have the same experience. And so there's our perception is not just taking stuff in, it's exploring the world We're constantly using our senses to gather more information. So this is has been especially explored in Gestalt figures in psychology. So here in the middle, you see, well, you can tell me what you see. What do you see? That middle left-hand image. Yeah. You see a face. Do you see just one face? A vase. You see it. All right. So you see a vase. So the vase is white and there's a black background. But you can also see it as two people looking at each other. And you can be that some people are seeing the vase and other people are seeing the two faces. Now they're seeing the same pattern of black and white, but they're having different experiences because they're interpreting, their mind is interpreting in different ways. And why this is a useful figure is that it can flip-flop. Now, like when you're just looking at the world and you're seeing a table or a person, then it doesn't flip-flop so much. You just see it as a stable thing and you sort of assume that that's how it is. But this Gestalt figure helps you to see that your mind is doing synthesizing. Similarly, with the pattern of dots, we tend to see that doesn't flip from one thing to another, but you can obviously see it's a bunch of dots, yet we also see it as an X, or as some kind of X shape. Your mind kind of joins the dots. There are all sorts of other Gestalt figures, and they generally try to investigate how does the mind impose a structure on experience. So Kant wasn't talking exactly about those sorts of cases, but his general point that the mind structures experience and percepts are structured by concepts is very similar to that idea that you get in modern psychology. So he thinks that kind of thoughts without content are empty, intuitions without concepts are blind. So intuitions are like the raw data, and they have to be structured by concepts in order to make sense. But I'm going to introduce this sort of distinction between the phenomenal and the noumenal worlds that Kant talks about. The phenomenal world is the world of appearance, and the noumenal world is the world of ultimate reality. We've talked about this idea of a revolution in the view. So the old view was that our knowledge conforms to objects, but Kant's view is that objects conform to our knowledge. We create the reality. So the mind is not like a mirror. Rather, the mind is creating our own reality. The mind is a structuring engine, and we create space, time, and causality. So the phenomenal world consists of appearances. It's defined by space and time. But the phenomenal world includes physics and the other sciences. So when we talk about knowledge, which we think of as objective, that's about the world of appearances. So what about the noumenal worlds? Things in itself. Well, for Kant, he thinks things in themselves beyond our experience is just unknowable. We can't know anything about it. All we can know is the stuff within the phenomenal world. So you can see in some ways how he is very like Hume. Hume says we can't go beyond the veil of experience. He says that all we can know is appearances. And so there's this strong parallel between Kant and Hume. But the difference is that Kant's says that there are these universal laws by which we structure our experience. And that's what enables objective knowledge to be possible, because the mind, everybody's mind is structuring it in the same way. Kant wasn't really one for talking about different people experiencing the world in different ways. He thought we all experience the world in the same way because we all bring the same laws to our experience. So this helps, this table helps you to kind of see the differences between the phenomenal world and the noumenal world. There's things as they appear to us in the phenomenal world, and things they are as they are in themselves. We can see the phenomenal world through our senses, whereas the noumenal world we can't know anything about. The phenomenal world has space, time, and causality. The ultimate reality, as far as we know, we have no ways to describe it because we have no real knowledge of it. So it's non-spatial, non-temporal. So science is, in fact, is about the phenomenal world, and the noumenal world allows for the possibility of stuff like the soul and God and freedom. He's not saying we can experience God or experience the soul, but he has saying it allows for the possibility that those things exist in ultimate reality, even though we can't see it. Some people find the blue glasses analogy useful. So imagine you were born with blue tinted glasses, or maybe you'd want to say contact lenses. So then right from your first experience, you see everything as blue. The blueness is a rule for your vision. So that's how you see the world. But then you can never see the true color of objects because you've always got these lenses on. For Kant, the glasses are space, time, and causality. You have to see everything through that sort of lens. So on Kant's view, science doesn't tell us about ultimate reality. It just tells us about the world of appearances. And that's what leaves room for the possibility of God and the soul. So Kant has this idea that we are imposing the laws of physics onto the phenomenal world. And to some extent they are a priori, to some extent they are discovered empirically, but they're still part of our concepts. So he's rejecting the idea that space and time are ultimately real. So he thinks that our experience is describable by math with geometry and arithmetic. So he thinks that Euclidean geometry, kind of sort of geometry that you grew up learning about, kind of squares and triangles and angles and area under the graph and stuff like that, that is a complete description of space. It's kind of, his view in some ways is quite similar to Descartes, in thinking math gives you a complete description of space. Kant thinks that that's because that's how we structure our experience, while Descartes thought that it was the ultimate reality. So geometry gives a description of the phenomenal world, but it's like a reflection of the innate structure of our minds. And so time is also something that we impose on the world. It's not subjective in the sense that it's different for everybody, but it is subjective in the sense that we impose time on our experience. And we wouldn't even be able to experience events if we didn't do that. Things have a duration, and we sort of create that. So he thinks there's a link between arithmetic and counting and time. It seems little obscure exactly how that argument would go. But I mean, there's some idea like when we say 1, 2, 3, there's a sequence of events, a sequence of moments in time. So there's something that we are constructing simultaneity and succession with our minds. All right, so that's his views about like science and the nature of space and time. He also has views on the self. So he thinks there's an empirical self, which is part of the phenomenal world, the part of appearances. That's the self we experience. That's the self that Hume was talking about when Hume says that he doesn't actually experience a soul or anything like that. He just experiences particular perceptions when he's thinking about himself. But Kant says, well, that's not the fundamental self. There's the fundamental self is part of the noumenal world. Sort of we have it through transcendental knowledge. We can infer that it must exist because that's what's doing the structuring of our experience. We can't see it, we can't experience it, but we know something is structuring our experience, so that must be our transcendental self. The transcendental self is like a unifying principle. Right. So there has to be that kind of self in order for our consciousness to have a unity. When you're looking around, you don't just have a bunch of different perceptions not connected. You see a whole bunch of things, and they are all simultaneous. They're all in the same visual field. I guess you get the similar sorts of things with when you're listening. You can judge two sounds to happen at the same time. So it's the self which makes it possible to have these coherent and unified experiences. And he thinks that if we didn't have that, our whole experience would be totally chaotic. We wouldn't be able to make sense of it. He doesn't think like that the self is like some kind of substance. In fact, we don't have much knowledge about it. All we really know is like what it does. It organizes and interprets our sensory data. So this kind of summarizes this contrast between the phenomenal self and the noumenal self. The phenomenal self corresponds to what Hume was talking about, but Kant's point is like that's not the only part of the self. There's this noumenal self, which we don't know much about, but that's what's doing all the organizing of our experience. So this transcendental self is not something we experience. It's like we might describe it as a limit concept, something which transcends our experience, but we can be sure exists because we know something is doing the synthesizing. He talks about God, and he says that there is reason to believe in God. Now that's an interesting phrasing, because he doesn't necessarily think that you can prove that God exists. In fact, he doesn't think you can prove that God exists. So what his argument is, not that you can prove that God exists, rather you can argue that it's necessary to believe in God. And his main argument for that is like life wouldn't make any sense if you didn't believe in God. Morality especially wouldn't make any sense if you didn't believe in God. So he thinks that the only way that morality makes sense is if there's like a highest good. So he talks about like the idea of the categorical imperative, which we need for morality, has to kind of live up to this rational ideal. You think somehow that the world wouldn't make sense if we didn't believe in God, because we have to think that virtuous people will be happy. That's like the world isn't going to be rational if that's not true. So the only way, well, I think for him, the only way to make sense of that is to say, well, there must be a God, and this God was going to be rewarding the virtuous and punishing the evil people. So that's how to make sense of morality. And he thinks, well, when's this going to happen? Well, it doesn't seem to happen in this life, so there has to be an afterlife where God does this. So this doesn't tell you anything about the afterlife, except that's where God does the punishing and the rewarding. So he also thinks that there has to be free will, again, because otherwise morality wouldn't make any sense. Now, the phenomenal world and the phenomenal self are ruled by the laws of science. They're deterministic. So he doesn't think there's any room for free will in the phenomenal world. But there's the noumenal world, which we don't know anything about. And he thinks there is room for non-deterministic events in that world, well, even though we don't know anything about it. So Kant is different from Hume. We've seen that Hume is a compatibilist. Hume thinks that free will is compatible with determinism. Hume says all there is to free will is being able to do what you want to do. Kant says, no, that view is just nonsense. He gets pretty heated about it. He calls Hume's view a wretched subterfuge and word jugglery. So he just thinks like you're calling something free will when it's not free at all. You're no more free than a clock or a watch, because you're still operating according to mechanistic principles. So Kant's view is if we are just an empirical self, if we're just ruled by the laws of science, then we're not free. And so he's totally disagreeing with Hume on that. So it's related to his overall kind of system. He certainly acknowledges that we are influenced by various factors. So we're not just able to do whatever we want, but we have some freedom. And this freedom somehow leaks up from the noumenal world, the world we have no knowledge of, and gives us the ability to believe in freedom and moral responsibility. So he thinks we have to be morally responsible for our actions. And his idea about the categorical imperative demands that we act in accordance with duty, irrespective of what we want. And we have to be motivated by duty, not by our own emotions or self-interest. And so we have to be able to completely determine what we do and give ourselves laws to live by. So he thinks like the possibility of this noumenal self is what allows for that possibility. So his basic idea is that we have to believe in free will in order to make sense of morality. And the whole idea of the noumenal self leaves open that possibility that it could be true. So he doesn't really prove that there is that kind of ultimate freedom. He just says it's possible and we have to believe in it. So as I've said, his view about morality is like all about rational rules. His view about morality is like just being rational will make you moral, because morality is just about being rational. It's about living according to rules. Any rational person will live morally. That if you are immoral, then you're irrational. And he proposes ideas about how to discover these rules of morality according to the categorical imperative. So his view of morality is extremely different from that of David Hume. Hume says morality is all about emotions and all about like the feelings we have for other people, compassion. Hume thinks that's the only way we can really think of morality, and So rationality is just a way to get what we want. Whereas for Kant, he thinks that emotions are completely irrelevant for morality. So probably the most interesting part of Kant's moral theory is this idea that we actually create morality through the exercise of our rational will. He thinks it's totally irrational, but so morality doesn't come from a God, it doesn't come from society, rather it's something that we create. So when we come to look at existentialism, we'll see in some ways the existentialists like this kind of idea a lot, the idea that you create your own meaning in life, you create your own rules. The existentialists don't think they're all bound by rationality. They think that you just have to kind of create them from nothing. But both of them kind of have this very sort of individualist view of morality, that you have to create your own morality. So you're giving the law to yourself. You're free, so you're self-governing. Self-governing doesn't mean just doing whatever the hell you like. Self-governing means creating rules by which you live, so then you follow those rules. It's about being reasonable and rational. You have to follow these universal rules. That's all. He thinks this is all very closely linked to his principle of humanity, the idea that we always have to respect people because they're rational, they deserve respect. He doesn't think we have any reason to respect animals because they're not rational. But with people, because they're rational, we should always treat them with respect and never just use people. So this view of morality has some interesting points to it. Right, and so I think that idea about morality is a very novel idea in the history of philosophy. It's not one that we saw before, and it's very influential, and there's something very appealing about it. Also, his idea that perception is active rather than passive, and our experience comes loaded with concepts. That's a very interesting idea. Certainly, Hume doesn't talk about our experience being loaded with concepts, but he does make a sort of similar distinction between the noumenal and the phenomenal world. But Kant brings in all this stuff about Euclidean geometry and a priori, and he thinks that Newton's laws of emotion sort of determine our experience. Not because they're true of absolute reality, but rather we construct our phenomenal reality through those laws. So he thinks that he seems to be making empirical claims, but he doesn't provide any empirical evidence. He doesn't do any experiments. He gives these sort of transcendental arguments that it has to be this way. And in some ways, his views have not really come out very well in terms of empirical evidence. So on Kant's view, space has to be Euclidean. He says, well, that's a necessary condition. It turns out when Einstein came along at the beginning of the 20th century, Einstein came along with his theory of general relativity. One of his main points was that space does not have to be Euclidean. When you come to massive objects like big suns or like black holes, then space gets curved and it's non-Euclidean. So whether or not space is Euclidean or non-Euclidean is like an empirical question. You can't just assume that space is always Euclidean. So it turns out that Kant was wrong, that it always has to be Euclidean. And he's kind of, generally we tend to think that Kant is saying we all have the same experience because we all bring the same rationality to our experience. But when you start to actually do experiments on people and look at different cultures, it seems that people have different experiences, because they have different background assumptions. They've been brought up in different ways, and they see the world, they literally see the world in different ways. They have different concepts and they impose those concepts on their experience. So this Kant's view easily slides into a more relativist view that it all depends on your culture. He doesn't want to be relativist. He thinks that there are the same laws for everyone. But once you actually start looking at people, you see that that's not true. And then his transcendental arguments. As I've explained, he has all these ideas that you have to believe in God, you have to believe in the afterlife, you have to believe in free will in order to make sense of morality. That life wouldn't make any sense, morality wouldn't make any sense if you didn't believe in those things. Well, for one thing, I mean, he's assuming that there is a universal morality for everyone. This isn't the place for us to examine those arguments, but let me tell you that they don't work. And it's not at all surprising that they don't work, right? I mean, these days, very few people think like that morality is absolute for everyone and there's no variation. We're very comfortable with the idea that different people have different kinds of morality. So the idea of a universal morality seems pretty implausible. I mean, there are a few people who hold on to that, but it's not particularly something that makes a lot of sense. We might believe in some universal things, but other parts of morality seem to vary a good deal. So the idea that there's a universal morality and we have to believe in God, the afterlife, and free will in order to believe in it, that argument doesn't work. And then, I mean, there's a whole idea about transcendental arguments generally. So this transcendental argument says we have to believe in an afterlife and God in order to kind of make sense of the world. And we have to believe that God is punishing the bad and rewarding the good. For morality to make any sense. You just think, well, how old are you? Are you 6 years old? I mean, that's not how life works. Why do we have to think that life makes sense? As some people like to say, life isn't fair. So Kant's assuming that morality has to kind of be fair, and therefore there has to be some ultimate kind of justice. Well, that just seems like pretty bizarre. I mean, Hume gave a pretty good account of free will. So, I mean, intuitions differ about whether a compatibilist view of just being able to do what you want is sufficient. You've seen that Kant thinks like that's just ridiculous, right? He thinks that it doesn't make any sense to. Kant thinks like you have to have this be like an unmoved mover. You have to be like God creating your actions uncaused by other things. Hume says, well, no, free will is pretty simple. It's just being able to do what you want to do. Now, if belief in morality is optional, then it seems that belief in free will is optional too. Maybe we just don't have to believe in morality at all. And some people don't believe in morality. I mean, we might call those people psychopaths, but you don't know. It does seem like there are some people who don't believe in morality at all. And the final point I want to make is like, suppose you say, look, life doesn't make sense unless you believe in God or the afterlife. Well, that doesn't prove that God or the afterlife actually exist. It just proves that that's what you need to believe in order for life to make sense. Like, well, maybe life doesn't make sense. It certainly doesn't give you any direct evidence that God or the afterlife actually exist. Right. So that's as much as I've got to say about Immanuel